strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. Welcome to members of the governing body. We have half a dozen of us in the room and everybody else online, I hope. But just to check who we have got online, I'm going to ask Sandra to do a roll call. Sandra, please.
Kia ora, members. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley. Councillor Casey.
Kia ora, Sandra.
Kia ora. Councillor Collins. Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora.
Councillor Cooper.
Present.
Councillor Dalton.
Present.
Councillor Darby.
I'm here.
Councillor Filipaina.
Hello.
Councillor Fletcher.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Henderson.
Kia ora koutou.
Councillor Hills. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman.
Good afternoon, Sandra.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Sandra. Present.
Councillor Simpson.
I'm present, Sandra. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Stewart.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Walker.
Present as always.
Councillor Watson.
Afternoon, Sandra.
And Councillor Young.
You're right, Tata hao.
Thank you. Back to you, Mayor Phil.
Thank you very much, Sandra and councillors. Look, just before we get into our formal proceedings, you'll be aware that I think 7 or 8 of us as councillors attended Orake Marae on Tuesday to pay our respects to the late Joe Hawke. Sadly, that depleted our CCO committee, but I think it was important that council was well represented at what was clearly a critically important occasion for Ngāti Whātua Orake. Joe Hawke was a man whose legacy goes beyond I can think of in Tamaki Makaurau, in that he had a vision, and the vision was that his people who had become landless, who had become marginalised and who had become impoverished would once again regain their mana in Tamaki Makaurau and regain at least a fraction of the land that they had lost. Ngāti Whātua were once the owners of 78,000 acres across Tamaki Makaurau, of which 3,500, of course, were gifted by Apihai Te Kawao to Governor Hobson to create the new capital of Auckland for New Zealand. Joe leaves a legacy of standing up against the injustices of the past, standing for a better future for his people, and he singularly achieved that in the 506 days of occupation of Bastion Point in face of the bulldozers and the determination of the then Prime Minister to build high value houses on their land. Today, Ngāti Whātua are a prosperous, thriving and integral part of our community and a critical partner for Auckland Council in what we do in our city. So today, as we start our meeting, to remember the life and achievements of the late rangatira Joe Hawke. Joe, haere, haere, haere atu rā, moi mai, moi mai, moi mai. If we can just take 1 minute's silence in memory of rangatira Joe Hawke. Thank you very much. I'll now call on Sandra to indicate whether we have any apologies. I have none listed.
No apologies received.
No apologies. We've got a full turnout today. A declaration of interest. Are there any members of the governing body that have any interest that they need to disclose relating to today's proceedings? If not, I'll ask for a confirmation of our minutes of the governing body meeting of the 28th of April 2022. Can I have somebody that will move that way, please? Paul Young, seconded by Councillor Al Filipina. If there are no matters arising out of the minutes, I'll put the motion to accept them. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. There are no petitions. There is no application for public input or local board input, and I've been advised of no extraordinary items. So we come to item number 9 on our agenda, the Independent Māori Statutory Board proposed funding agreement for the 2022-23 financial year. So the purpose is to approve the funding agreement and to, I'll just ask for a mover and seconder. Maybe Al Filipina and Angela Dalton would like to move and second this, and invite James Stevens and Alistair Cameron, if he may be online, just to talk to the paper, please. James.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Auckland Council makes a funding agreement with the Independent Māori Statutory Board each year, and this meets the legislative requirement that we fund their reasonable costs. This year, the proposed funding is similar to the previous funding agreements in dating back to 2019. That's about 3.025 million, and this funding covers the costs of the board members and their secretariat. This report also recommends the delegation to the Chief Executive that he is able to negotiate variations to this funding agreement up to $50,000, and this just removes the need to take the full agreement back to governing body if there's a small variation requested. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, James. The sum is just slightly over $3 million and slightly under what the IMSB has received in the last 2 years. And of course, funding the Independent Māori Statutory Board is a statutory obligation on us under the Local Government Act that established the new Auckland Council. So we'll go first to questions, and I have a question in the name of Councillor John Watson. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, James, for your report, a very succinct and clearly articulated one. I do have some questions, however, in respect of point number 6 in the executive salary. And I'm not sure if you've got this information, but it says in point 6, an independent review of remuneration for the IMSB members has been completed and has recommended that remuneration should remain at the current proportion of 70% of councillor remuneration. So I'm taking that to mean that that's the councillor remuneration at the lowest level in our salary rate, which is 113,000 basically. Is that correct?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, that's correct. It's yep, those are the calculations.
Okay, so that, just on the basis of that then, so that amounts to a salary of nearly $80,000, $79,100. In terms of that review that was completed, independent review, I'm curious to know what the proportionality is to then local board remuneration, and I say that because that on the same salary rates we see that most local board members, no matter where they are roughly around 45,000 band, and this remuneration is near enough double that. So in this review, is there any proportionality between the various components of the governance structure at Auckland Council? And we've got the councillors, but in respect of board members, is there any comparison being made to them in terms of assessing this this figure that this independent review has apparently come up with?
I'll direct that question to Phil Wilson, who's here today in place of our Chief Executive, Jim Stabak. Phil.
Through your worship, what the independent company that looks at this strategic pay, they look at a range of things, the duties of members of the IMSB, the makeup of their work. They express it as a percentage of councillors, but they look more broadly at relativity with a number of governance roles. It's fair to say I don't understand that they look specifically at relativity with local board roles.
Okay, so just in terms of arriving at that figure, and you mentioned a number of activities that board members are involved in. Are those activities articulated anywhere so that anyone reading this report might get some sense of how that workload might be different from, say, a board member?
There are aspects of the role set out in the legislation itself. They go to the role itself of the IMSB, therefore the role of the members of the IMSB. There is some material that we supply to the company that does the independent evaluation. I would have to review that to determine what was appropriate for the public arena or not, although I imagine the core of it would be fine for public consumption.
Well, you would hope so, given that it's public money that's funding that. I'll reserve the right to speak on this one, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question, Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. So I've got a couple of questions, and I mean the data or the detail may be there, but just can't find it. So in the report, and I'm looking at page 9 under the funding, it mentions additional project work, and it says the FY22 budget, including an additional 150,000 for 2 extraordinary projects. And I'd just like to know what those extraordinary projects are. Thanks. That's one question.
Thank you. And through the chair, Wayne, sorry, Councillor Walker, could you clarify which point you're talking about? Is it point 23? Sorry.
I'm looking at the draft of the funding agreement for FY23, and I'm looking at the end of that agreement where it specifically mentions the 150,000 for the additional project work, but it doesn't mention what the projects are.
Thank you. And through the chair, these were 2 projects which were carried out in the previous financial year. They're not carried through to the coming financial year. I don't recall off the top of my head what those projects were.
Okay, well, if it's possible to receive the information on that later, that'd be great. The other question I've got just goes to the funding, and I'm just tracking it back, and that's around the board remuneration and expenses, and then you've got the secretariat. Does one of those numbers, and I'm assuming it's more likely to be the secretariat, cover the cost of accommodation? So that's a question.
James, have you got information to answer the councillor on that, or is that something that you'll have to get back to him on?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, yes, I will have to get back to you on that. I'm not clear what is covered in expenses. I'm not aware of travel, but I would need to find out and come back to you.
So I'm not referring to travel. I'm referring to the office expenses of the IMSB. And if I can just go a step further by way of my questioning, and that is that I would anticipate that the cost of the offices is probably fairly substantial. I make the observation that if I look at our own council offices, the building's probably, I don't know whether it's half empty or 3/4 empty or the like. We have a substantial number of people that are no longer working at the council offices, they're working remotely. The assumption I'm making is that we've got adequate capacity, and given the very close relationship between the IMSB and the council, and in particular the support that's noted around that, has there been a consideration of offering the IMSB office space within Albert Street, because there could be a significant saving there? And obviously that saving would come through to council because we're already covering the cost of it.
Phil Wilson, please.
Through your worship. Look, that suggestion is well made. Obviously, our accommodation needs, our footprint has changed markedly in the last 18 months, and therefore that may well be right that there are opportunities other than the existed leased accommodation. The terms of that lease I'm not familiar with, but I would be happy to take that matter up with the Secretariat and with our property department for discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. And if that could happen with some urgency, because obviously our council is financially stressed, and I'm sure Desley is looking to make savings, value for money wherever she can. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Greg Sayers, last question. Oh, no, not last question. Second to last question.
Thank you, Worship. I'm going to just pick up on questions from Councillor Watson. They may be best directed to Mr. Wilson, but it's very important that the members are remunerated fairly. So, I couldn't find in the report, obviously, if it's being linked to the councillor role at 70%, are those roles full-time, Phil, or part-time? You know how a councillor role is full-time. Is ISMB members, are they part-time, or are they also full-time roles?
Through the Mayor, I understand that the members, the ordinary IMSB member roles are evaluated as being part-time, but significantly so, a significant proportion of any given week on IMSB business. The chair is in a different situation and remunerated as a full-time role.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Phil. So normally those terms like strategic that you mentioned that carried out these exercises, and I understand perhaps the remuneration authority does it the same way, they would job size a role. So they'd look at all the responsibilities, accountabilities, decision-making aspects of a role, not the person, but of the role, and then size that to a certain number of whatever model that they use, and then they compare that against the market. So I don't know what our market is. There's one called public sector market, and they see where that intersects at the medium point or the upper quartile, or wherever that policy may rest. So Phil, I would have thought that I don't know if we can get some transparency around that, as if that firm did size the job, and what markets they compare it to, I think it could be useful, because maybe tying it to a percentage, a 70% of a full-time councillor's role, I haven't got the comparison between the two methodologies. So is there a way that we could get some information back from that firm about why they chose to benchmark it as a 70% rather than job sizing it? And also related to that, the 70%, it says a continuation of it, because that's how it had been done in the past. Was that set up as a recommendation by a similar type of firm in the past, or was that just set up at the start of the Super City by the transition agency? How did that 70% originate? Do you know?
Yes, I can answer that question. So the same firm that conducted this assessment has done it previously, in fact, for a number of terms, and coincidentally, it's the same firm that council uses to benchmark salaries across employed positions. They do have access to and take account of the Remuneration Authority assessments of job size. So I can confirm it's a pretty well-informed view that they reach. The fact that they have to do this is set out as a requirement in the legislation. So there isn't a lot of discretion here, but of course we do ensure that it's done in a robust, objective manner.
Thanks, Phil. Just, Worship, I guess just as a supplementary to that, if you're able to come back to us either directly or indirectly, perhaps so it's quite clear about that robustness that you've just talked about, because I'd hate the role to be a bigger job size and not being remunerated to its full worth. So I just would like some peace of mind in that, and perhaps as part of that they could indicate what market sectors and job sizes they went through. Is that possible?
I can liaise with you post the meeting, Councillor.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Just a supplementary to that, given the statutory independence of the Independent Maori Statutory Board, if we were not to have an outside agency assess the proper level of remuneration for board members, how would council be able to reach a conclusion on what it was appropriate to pay them? Maybe that question to Phil Wilson. Quite clearly, you may have answered your own question, Your Worship. I think that is correct. We do need to take care that we keep this objective, independent and so on, given the nature of the board. I really think that's the important thing we've got to consider in the questions that we're asking. It's appropriate to delve in to different aspects of the report, but to note that this is a statutory obligation on us, and the board is independent of us, and therefore the council itself has to take particular care that it does not look like it's developing a funding agreement in a way other than that is objective and relying on independent objective advice. Next question, we've got a big build-up of questions now, so we'll try to get through them all. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Yeah, I'll wait to speak rather than question, sorry. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. My question was around this being a service level agreement and why it isn't something like a partnership agreement in line with the whole spirit of Te Tiriti, but I'm wondering if it's because it's to maintain that autonomy between the two.
Kia ora. Thank you. Through the chair. The service level agreement talks about the services that Auckland Council departments provide to the IMSB in terms of largely back office support type work, the human resources, for example. So it's an agreement which just sets out what services council will provide to the IMSB, and that saves the IMSB duplicating those services within their own secretariat. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah, yeah. I guess so, yeah.
The service level agreement's an adjunct to the funding agreement, and the funding agreement expresses something a little bit more in terms of the relationship.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just the terms supplier and customer just doesn't gel with, you know, what we're trying to achieve here. But I understand it's just an instrument. Yeah. I have another question. That's okay. What do we do in regards to, you know, there's the same issue that keeps coming up in our meetings around consultation and engagement. You know, IMSB, rightly so, keep bringing up that we haven't done the proper consultation engagement with our mana whenua, with our Māori partners. So is there something in the agreement that holds us to account on that? Some kind of checks and balances? Because then they're just going to have to keep bringing it up. What is there to make the council do it genuinely?
Through your worship, well, I'd like to start my answer by expressing the commitment of the organisation to do that well. We obviously aspire to do it well. The IMSB has a statutory role to hold us to account in that regard and to audit us. The audit is the periodic audit is the key mechanism that they have for monitoring our performance and giving us feedback. We've been through one recently, so that's the primary mechanism they have alongside the advice of the Secretariat directly into our departments.
Oh, thank you. Lucky we have them then.
Thank you, Councillor. Next question, Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've just got 4 quick questions, and hopefully they're just a couple of word answers. First question, so the funding is a requirement of legislation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. This is slightly less than previous years, the figure that we're looking for in A.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. The amount has been independently assessed.
Through the chair, the amount was Council's finance team and IMSB discussed their budget requirements for the year, much as they would with any other council department, but as if the IMSB were any other council department in determining what their needs were for the coming year.
Okay, and whilst the figure is mentioned in A, should there be any direct savings, they would be, and they didn't match that figure, they didn't spend that amount of money, that money would come back to council as savings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes.
Thank you. So the only one I'll just ask again, the amount was agreed to by council, just the process around that, Your Worship. So the amount that's been agreed, I said, was it independently assessed? And I'm hearing that it was an agreement between the council staff and the IMSB to meet the legislative requirements. Would that be correct?
Yes, so the decision today is whether to accept the funding, the proposed funding agreement or not. The funding itself has not been independently assessed, but staff's advice is that this meets the reasonable costs of the Independent Māori Statutory Board.
And it's less than what's been previously given.
If I might, through the Mayor, in past years we have convened a subgroup of councillors to review this and to recommend it. I did not convene that this time exactly because there was no material change from the previous year, and in fact it was reduced slightly thus accommodating inflationary pressures and such. So took the view that it didn't need reassessed by a subgroup of councillors leading into this process today.
I say thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Filipina.
Tēnā koe koro matua, tēnā koe James. Can I just confirm that the proposed funding agreement and that the staff considered this and are satisfied that the level of total direct funding, which is in front of us, is appropriate and is in line with the parameters agreed in the 10-year budget? Can I confirm that?
Yes.
Also, a flow-on from Councillor Bartley's question around the service agreement. Can you confirm that with that and the SLA is that it is through that service level agreement saving money? It reduces the overall cost to the ratepayer.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, that is the intent of having the service level agreement, that it removes duplication in provision of support services.
And my last part, Your Worship, is can you also confirm that the mahi, the work that they do, this the Independent Māori Statutory Board do, is across Tāmaki Makaurau, it's across Auckland wide and not just centralised in a local board area, but it's across Tāmaki Makaurau, across Auckland?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Okay, kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Kia ora, and thank you, James, for your report. My question is a follow-on from an earlier question in relation to, I find it quite interesting really, accommodation. Now, if we have an independent organisation, and whilst I'm well and truly for saving funds, absolutely no doubt, I just question, how would an organisation be independent if they are located in the same building? Now, I just want to preface this with some work I did when I was doing my master's about psychology at work and behaviours, and so much, as we all know, is built on relationships and beliefs. And so I just wonder, would it be fair and reasonable to ask the Independent Māori Statutory Board to be located in the same building where they may come under pressure? And please, just a note on this, Your Worship, it's not that I don't agree with saving funds, I just would like an answer to the real logistics around the psychology of pressure from people as they have relationships, they get to see people more often, and then would that mean that we had independence? So I'm not sure who is going to answer that. And I know that Independent Māori Statutory Board are well and truly capable of being independent, but there is such a thing as relationship building and pressures that can occur if you are seated near or next to someone or next room. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's about the perception of being independent, I think, is the key point you're making. James, have you got any comment on that? No, I think your point's well made, Councillor, that if the organisation is wanting to be seen as being independent and auditing us independently, being in the bowels of our organisation might create some perceptional difficulties. I think your comment's a fair one. Right, the last question is a further question from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So, without wanting to prejudice the independence of the IMSB, if I just look at the line items under the funding agreement, which include legal and planning, engagement and reporting to Māori and stakeholders, engage Māori expertise for council projects and plans. Is there a facility for Auckland Council to provide these at an internal cost arrangement that might well be more economical and more efficient than the same cost being applied to some external party? So are some of these items actually met by council and subject to a charge, or are all of these costs external? And are there opportunities to make savings? Because I do know that council employs quite a number of people within our Māori department effectively. Thanks.
Thank you. Phil Wilson.
Through your worship. These are external costs, and it relates closely to the previous discussion about accommodation, that there is an independence brought, it's implicit in their role that they provide an independent perspective into the organisation and are resourced accordingly. There's a lot of work that happens jointly in partnership, but of course that requires two parties to come to the table adequately resourced to do that work. So this is the resourcing independent of council of the board.
Thank you. We now come to comments. First request for a comment is Councillor John Watson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd just like to clarify at the minute that the line of questioning here, while apparently zeroing in on one aspect of what is a well-written and helpful report, is I hope it's not been taken as a undue or excessive examination of the salaries of the IMSB. The IMSB members take what's given to them, so it's not as if they're setting their own salary. So I just want to make that clear at the start. This is not directed at the individual members who do a good job, and I'm sure who are very busy. But however, this is public money, and the word proportionality has been used here. And I think in terms of that public comparison, for instance, I mean I know that in the area where I have a little experience in teaching, for instance, a graduate teacher starts on a salary of 52,000 a year. An experienced teacher after 5 to 8 years is earning between 70 and 80k, which I can assure you are very demanding roles in terms of commitment and time. So in that entrance of proportionality, I think we're on a bound to compare that to what happens out in the public sector as well. As far as the issue of the salary comparisons to council go, that 70% component that has been identified here, I just really want to not so much highlight the council of the IMSB proportion of that, but the proportionality then of how these various salary bands come through, how they relate to local boards. And I say that because I was at a meeting earlier in the week where there was a move to increase what I regard as an already very significant salary from the floor, from members of the Auckland Council. So this isn't sort of just an isolated instance of zeroing in on the poor old IMSB. This does happen in other quarters as well. And when I look at the drive to try and attract people to roles in council, particularly local board, we complain about the poor voter turnout. We complain sometimes about the ability to attract a diversity of people. This sort of disproportionality, if I can put it that way, I don't think helps. And it's not just in this instance. I look at the proportionality between board chairs, for instance, who in a number of instances earn over $90,000 compared to that salary rate of board members sitting around that 40, 45 level. So I think what this does today for me anyway is to highlight the disproportionality that exists between salaries in this organisation and the factors that are taken in consideration as they relate to the most numerous component of the governance structure, and that's local board members. So that's certainly my reason in highlighting this. And as far as the specifics of the role that have determined this outcome here, I certainly would appreciate that being maybe articulated in some detail, so we just don't have this kind of reference back to the independent review without any real substantiating data. So that's the point I wanted to make, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a valid one, both in terms of what happens with people working for a living out in the public, and also, in this case, with other members of the Auckland Council who are also part of this relativity, and who I think in the instances I've referred to are not proportionately reflected. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you. I had a question before, but I think it was answered in the fact that the Remuneration Authority don't set the IMSB rates, but they do set their travel expenses, etc. So it is hard to get relativity, and the reality is we've already been told by the chair of the Remuneration Committee we should be paid about 20% higher, but it's not publicly palatable. So, but what I wanted to say was to address the fee that the IMSB members get. In my experience over the last 9 years, when I look at the work that I've done with Glenn Wilcox from IMSB on hearings, and I'll talk about that in the next item, you know, hours and weeks of hearings, deliberations, all of that sort of work. IMSB members do quite different work from local board members, and I mean, I wouldn't say no to 50,000 a year for the level of work at local board, and I'm not downplaying what they do, but we're making regional decisions, and IMSB sit around the table with us and make those regional decisions. So the level of what they're having to undertake is different, but also they're on many of our subcommittees delegated to sign off submissions to the government, quite significant pieces of work. They're part of plan changes, all sorts of kind of quite intense and involved types of work they do. So, you know, and when it comes down to it, we don't set it. You know, it's set by strategic pay, and I'm the chair of 3 other organisations, and I use that company because it has actually shown that they take into account everything that's done, and you get a fair go at it. You know, you can see what's been done, and you can see what are the bands and what it's worth. And so I don't think you can do anything more than have an independent company check this out. But I, for one, in my experience, you know, there's a lot of work done by IMSB members, and it's just, you can't even compare it to what local boards do. It's more comparable to what we do. And even though they're not elected, they are accountable to their iwi constituents that have put them there. So they have all sorts of outside work just as we do. So I just wanted to support that. I think it's great that they've made a bit of a change here. It's not an increase. And I really do not understand this sort of, it feels like several people having a go. And I want to also support Councillor Mulholland's comments around maintaining independence. You can't do that if you sit in the office next door, especially when they hold quite an important audit function. So I do support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to take a brief call because I've had a chance to look up what the Local Government Act, Local Government Auckland Council Act, Schedule 2 says about this. Point 1, the Auckland Council must appoint an independent expert to inform it of appropriate fees for the council to pay members of the board. That's point 1. Point 4, the independent expert must inform the board and Auckland Council of the appropriate fee for the chairperson, deputy and other board members. Section 5, the Auckland Council must act in accordance with the information provided to it by the independent expert. So we've had a long debate here, but there is no discretion. It's set out in Schedule 2 of the Local Government Act. The strategic pay have gone through this exercise 10 times. I'm not sure, because I haven't been here through the 10 years of council, whether it's been questioned before, but they have been consistent in their view that that's the level at which the pay should be set. And the final comment I'd just like to make, and is to really back up Councillor Cooper's point, Glenn Wilcox, who just the first person that comes to mind on the board, works incredibly hard. Actually, the hours he puts in, he'd justify twice that salary. I think it is a fraught area when you talk about remuneration, because I get constant comments from the public, why are these councillors paid so much? And I'd say the same thing in defence of councillors. You know, I know of councillors that work every hour of the day and are responsive and accountable to their constituents. So I think we have to be really, really careful before we start pointing the finger on this one. I can't say from years in Parliament that every parliamentarian earned the salary they earned. Some of them probably deserved twice as much, and some of them probably deserved a fraction of what they got. That's the nature of being an elected office. This isn't an elected office, but it is set out very clearly in the Act what we must do, and we follow the Act, because the Act is binding on us and there is no discretion. So we come now to Councillor Angela Dalton for a comment, please.
Thank you. And it's along the same lines about the work that the IMSB do. You know, I'll be supporting these recommendations, of course, as seconder. But again, if I hark back to the Audit and Risk Committee and look at the treaty audit and the work that has gone on in there, and the accountability, which is the role of IMSB, that I hear as a governing body member around the table, the questions that we get and the challenges that we get from the members, Karen Wilson, Tohi Narai, the chair, David, and it's a great learning experience, that's for sure, but they are doing their job, and they're doing their job well, and it extends to outside of the meeting room. And just to confirm, I've just had an experience with Glenn Wilcox on the Freedom Camping bylaws, and that's a value add. And if we're going to talk about the value add being the mana whenua input in the Māori and the Te Ao Māori perspective, and I guess that's the uniqueness when we go to, if we're going to talk about how much people should be paid, the point of difference is that they are Māori. That is the point of difference. And they are in a minority as well. So in terms of being able to just get anybody to do that job, it is impossible to just get anybody to do that job outside of Māoridom. I also wanted to say something else and I've forgotten what it was, but I guess in summary, I'm supporting these recommendations. I think they're value add. We're lucky to have them to be able to keep us honest on our obligations to the Tiriti of Waitangi. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just briefly supporting these recommendations as well, and just sort of adding that it's not that they're a benefit, although they are hugely beneficial. It's also a moral and legal requirement upon us. And so, goodness me, I think that's probably not enough. I think they probably do a lot more work than what they get paid. And yeah, I thank them for that, and I think they do a great job for Auckland. That's it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to confirm, under Len Brown's mayoralty, I actually chaired the subcommittee that Phil Wilson referred to, and he can confirm that. I can confirm that there isn't the discretion in and around this area. So it was interesting being there from the get-go, but it is appropriate that there is scrutiny in terms of any public expenditure. But I would just say to those who are perhaps wanting to discharge their responsibilities and accountabilities today, that having chaired it in the past, there isn't a lot of discretion here, and I think that nobody is questioning the performance of the IMSB. It's just members who are wanting to make sure that we are undertaking our roles and responsibilities as councillors properly.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And in reply, Councillor Al-Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Councillor Fletcher, I think it's appropriate that I close the debate after your comments. Why is because I was going to mention the fact that you chaired the committee way back in the day in regards to this. So I just acknowledge your work through this. Your Worship, I just wanted to sort of really acknowledge the negotiation team. And was mentioned earlier around finance and performance, but the team and the Secretariat of the Independent Māori Statutory Board. As a result of the negotiation, we have a situation today where the ask is less than what was previously made. So I know and I acknowledge the Independent Māori Statutory Board in recognising the financial situation that we find ourselves. So I acknowledge them, but also again the finance and performance team and the negotiation team. So Your Worship, I'm not going to sort of take up that much time, but for those that have been around the table since 2010, I remember attending the pōwhiri in November of 2010 for the Independent Māori Statutory Board. And can I say as my last comment, Your Worship, that and governing body, can I say that we as a council are all the better for the Independent Māori Statutory Board, especially in regards to the accountability. That is their role, and with all the reports, the independent reports they have done, we are all the better for that in regards to the te tiriti o Waitangi. So to everybody concerned, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, and yes, definitely support the recommendation. Kia ora, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. So the recommendations are on the screen. I'll take the vote on the voices. I haven't had any request for a division. So if you're looking at recommendations A, B and C, all those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I think I can declare that carried and carried unanimously. Thank you very much for that. We now come to item number 10, which is a decision on the proposed new signs bylaw and associated controls. We had three members, council members and well, two council members and one IMSB member, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Henderson and independent member Wilcox on the hearings panel. Could I ask maybe Councillor Cooper to move and Councillor Henderson to second the recommendations, and I'll call on Councillor Linda Cooper to introduce it, and then ask Paul Wilson as our Senior Policy Manager to add any other relevant comments. Councillor Cooper.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor. So this item is we've given you recommendations from the panel on the proposed new signs bylaw, and which replaces the Auckland Council and Auckland Transport signs bylaw. So it's bringing the two together to make it more sensible and easier to understand, which I'm sure all of you who are standing for re-election will be happy. You only have to look at one sign bylaw instead of two when you're putting up your signs. So first of all, I want to thank Councillor Shane Henderson and IMSB member Glenn Wilcox for, we spent days and hours on this, hearings and deliberations, and as usual, Glenn really put his heart and soul into it, and he brings that different worldview to it. So I'll take it as read, but we did put this out for notification on August the 26th, and we had, on September, we adopted it August the 26th. We had a month of consultation, and we had 76 people and 30 organisations provided feedback. And what we're giving you here is, we think, some really sensible approach to how we manage signs, but just to note that this did not include alcohol signage. We had a separate process for that, a hearing process, and Councillor Bartley, my deputy on the Regulatory Committee, and Councillor Afeso heard those, and they are going to manage those in the way they see fit, lobbying government. So I don't know whether you wanted to comment on that. No. So I just commend this to you for adoption. And if there's any questions, myself or Paul are happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And if I can just ask Paul Wilson if there's anything that he'd like to add to it. Paul.
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing further to add. Happy to answer any questions.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, I'm very sorry to the directors from AT, because we don't usually do this, but we had the pleasure of having board directors from AT, Kylie Clegg and Darren Linton, and it was absolutely invaluable having their point of view as well, though we had to get agreement 5 times on everything, but it was really worthwhile. So it's really good to see us as CCO and Auckland Council working more closely together, which I think all of you will be pleased about.
Thank you very, very much for that, Councillor, and that reminded me that this is a joint bylaw with Auckland Transport, and I understand that this was going, but it has to be passed by both the Auckland Transport Board and ourselves. I understand Auckland Transport Board considered it this morning. Paul,
It passed.
It's been passed.
It's been adopted. Sorry, I should have.
Okay,
when I go off script, that's what happens.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. No, I just wanted to get clarification of that. So we'll open it up for questions now, and the first question is from Councillor Papacoon. Councillor Coon.
Oh, tēnā koe te koro matua. Thank you for this, and do want to acknowledge and thank all the work on the panel. Do really appreciate it that you do that behind the scenes, and thank you officials as well for the work on this. I just have 2 brief pārtai. The first one is in relation to the LED signage, which is a big issue in the city centre for residents. I know that this isn't covered by this bylaw, but can I just get an understanding, I think it's about where that's going to be dealt with, and if there's any work in train about that?
Maybe go to Paul for that.
Can I ask that question to, kia ora, Paul.
Hello, thank you through Your Worship. Insofar as this bylaw is concerned, there are rules around illuminated signs. The bylaw panel did have quite a wide-ranging discussion. There was concerns raised about reviewing the illumination levels. And the decisions were to make sure that we're aligned with those levels that are in the unitary plan for consistency, and at the same time acknowledging that when the unitary plan comes up for review, that there will need to be a bit of a wider discussion around what those illumination levels are. Insofar as illumination outside of signs, that's a matter for the unitary plan. Thank you.
So that's like on a 2026 timetable. We won't be able to do any review before that?
That would be something that you'd need to raise with the plans in place. I'm not aware of their program timing, that is.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that away. And if I just may, just one other quick query, and that's around, this extends prohibitions, for example, on portable signs to the whole city centre. Is there going to be compliance issues that this is going to put more work onto compliance staff? And as we know, there's a lot of pressure in that space at the moment. So are we resourcing the need for more compliance staff?
I don't think Paul can really answer that because he's not in the compliance team. But I guess when we're making these decisions, I mean, those are a consideration, but you don't make bylaws in relation to how many staff you've got to monitor them. But we always, in our bylaws, that's out of scope for the bylaw, but what we always do is we always have another basket, another kete of things that are out of scope that we send to the relevant departments. And so any of that raised in any bylaws, we send that to our regulatory compliance. We often have them sitting in the room during deliberations so we can ask questions. But really, I think, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't make bylaws to suit how many staff we have at any particular time. But we're really aware that if you make bylaws, it's got to have the ability to be enforced. So I think that's really where it lies. We send any concerns we have off to regulatory compliance, but Paul might want to add.
Thank you, Councillor. Paul, anything you'd like to add to that?
Just to add that certainly the compliance staff have been along with us and looking at how this new rule will be implemented, and they'll also be looking to work with their existing relationships, including with the Heart of the City, in order to work out how best to make shop owners aware and to increase voluntary compliance.
Thank you very much. Next question, Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mayor. I was on the call for the Auckland Transport Board meeting this morning. The item was quite brief. It appeared that the board had probably considered it in a workshop and had posed most of its inquiry there. I did hear the lead officer say that this was not a material review. This was more about bylaws, coming together. Paul, is that your view, that it was not a material review?
Certainly through your worship, the overall, this bylaw is very much around consolidating, they described it as 3 bylaws into one. And for the majority of the rules, we're retaining the current intent and effectively giving it a big facelift to make it easier to read. There were some key changes that were put through, and they were highlighted in the statement of proposal, such as the portable sign ban extension, increasing the size of wall-mounted signs in heavy industrial zones, which you would have heard about there, and and so there were some there were some key changes, but the majority of the current rules and certainly their intent were retained, and that's why they described it in that sense.
So we haven't got a lot of public feedback, have we, to going out upon seeking public feedback? I heard the number 106 submissions at the Auckland Transport Board. Councillor Cooper's mentioned 76, but I guess that's the
individuals.
Maybe they're the
and 30 organisations, Councillor.
Individuals. Right. Is that the level of public engagement that we would have expected on this? How many did we have when we last looked at this? I think it was some 6 years ago.
Yes, there were more feedback received the first time we went out, although again we need to compare what it was that we're going out with. Back in 2015, we were going out to create a brand new bylaw from scratch for the very first time from Auckland Council, and so it did attract more attention. Whereas this one, when we put out the proposal, was very much along the lines of, for the most part, we're retaining the current rules, and here are the things that we are changing that you need to pay attention to. So it is to be expected that there would be less feedback for that reason.
Thanks. Look, just one other question, Mayor. Real estate signage is, I have an opinion on that, and having worked in that industry, I know what the real estate sign is for. It's not to advertise the property. Real estate signage is now allowed to be illuminated, I've discovered. Mind you, it was allowed to be illuminated prior with little solar illumination. It's allowed to be on the public verge. It's allowed to distract motorists. It's allowed to do a lot of things because of the location that we're allowing it to be in. Was there any understanding or informing of those making the decision on real estate signage, the change in the marketing of property in the time since 2015 to now? And I'm referring to the signs that are supposedly advertising the property, on the property, at the face of the property, or on the verge of the property, if there is a verge, and also the remote signs that direct primarily motorists to a property. Was there any understanding of the quite dramatic change in how to market properties in the 6 years.
Through your worship, yes, that did come through in submissions as well, and through our findings investigation. So through the course of this bylaw, there was the increasing use, or the start of the use back in more when the bylaw was first adopted, around illumination of signs or the use of digital signs. And through the review, the position was taken in the statement of proposal that the governing body adopted for consultation, a desire to mainly retain the current rules as they currently were. So the new bylaw before you today is more take some clarifications about what those current rules and the intent of those were. So it does provide some scope for those things to occur. And again, in relation to illumination, there is that wider discussion around the unitary plan to be had.
Yeah, look, not quite addressing what I wanted there, Paul, but look, I totally respect your response there. And look, lastly, the urban design unit, what contribution did it make to this review? Was the urban design unit's view sought? Did it make a submission, or did it give, actually not a submission, did it give council feedback on the development of the bylaw?
So the staff from the design office and plans and places were engaged as part of the project, and we did have a representative on the project steering group as well. They did provide comments on those more critical aspects of the review, and again, there is this wider discussion that does need to happen at that unitary plan level. And the reason why I keep saying that is the way that this bylaw is a subset of the unitary plan. The unitary plan sets the overall strategic approach on how to manage signs, and the bylaw is one of the tools underneath that. Yes, back to you, members.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. That's exhausted our questions. So are there any comments on the bylaw? I don't appear to have received any. So a big thanks to Councillors Cooper, Henderson and IMSB member Wilcox for the work they've done on it. These bylaws come into effect today, with the repeal of the old bylaw also today. So we're doing this in a very, very timely way. So I'll put the recommendations A to K to members of the governing body. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. And I'll declare that carried, and I think unanimously. We come now to item number 11, which is consultation on the draft National Adaptation Plan. That was sent out to all members of the governing body, I think last Friday, and it's still open for any comments back from councillors until tomorrow. But we'd be keen if you had any thoughts on the draft plan to feed that in. But the purpose of today's recommendations is to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, myself and an IMSB member, to approve the submission that will be sent off, finalised and sent off probably sometime early next week. Can I ask Councillor Richard Hills to move and Councillor Pipacoombe to second the recommendations, and ask Matthew Blakey and maybe Megan Tyler, if she wants to make comments as well, to introduce the item. Matthew, welcome, and if you'd like to take us through the item, please.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm here today to present the item on our submission on the draft National Adaptation Plan and Managed Retreat, and in particular to seek delegated authority for sign-off. There was a governing body workshop held on the 18th of May, where a more detailed presentation was provided on the draft National Adaptation Plan and Managed Retreat, and key themes for feedback were provided at that workshop. So I won't be going through a detailed analysis of the plan or the submission today. but would like to present an overview to you. I'd just like to confirm whether the slides will be shared or whether I should share those slides now.
If you can share them, please, Matthew, yourself.
Excellent. Thank you. If I could just request permission to share the slides, that would be great.
Yep, we're just in the process of doing that. Sorry, having invited you to share, we haven't yet given you permission to do so. But that's happening just as we speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I apologise.
How are you going there? Oh, yep, it's up on my screen now. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the delay. So, as mentioned, here today to present, and in particular to seek delegated authority to approve the final submission. The Environment and Climate Change Committee would normally consider a submission on the draft National Adaptation Plan as it sits within the committee's terms of reference. However, due to the timeframes we're working to, this has not been possible. So I wanted to provide you with a very brief overview in terms of the draft National Adaptation Plan. You will have received this or a similar presentation at the workshop, but just in way of a reminder, the draft National Adaptation Plan is the first government adaptation plan for Aotearoa New Zealand. So in that way it is significant. It sets central government's direction for the first time relating to climate change adaptation. In that way, it's different to the direction we've received around emissions reduction, which is more established. This is very much the first time we are seeing this direction coming through. It is a requirement under the Climate Change Response Act, so central government are required to develop a national adaptation plan. It builds on a body of work that has been completed over the last few years, including the National Climate Change Risk Assessment and the Climate Change Adaptation Technical Working Group report, and it follows on from that to set direction. It's worth noting that the National Adaptation Plan is aimed at a specific level in terms of the context and the level in which it operates. So the emphasis is on shaping regulatory frameworks and institutions to align with the changing climate context. It aligns statutory and policy directions to account for changing risks, and it establishes coordination across government and with sectors. And lastly, it brings together scattered climate information supporting supporting access to climate data sets and information. So that's really about gathering what we know and bringing it together into one place. So really just to highlight there that is the level of decision making and direction that the National Adaptation Plan is focused on. It is not focused on local specific issues, but rather setting the direction at a central government level and a regulatory and policy level. In addition to the draft National Adaptation Plan, there is also consultation on early thinking relating to managed retreat and flood insurance consultation. So this is very much aligned with the draft National Adaptation Plan, but it's early thinking on this. Managed retreat will be covered through the Climate Adaptation Act in due course. So managed retreat relates to critical actions within the National Adaptation Plan, such as the reform of the resource management system. It focuses on passing legislation to support managed retreat and develop options for home flood insurance issues. So the focus here in terms of the early thinking for managed retreat is around the objectives to guide the development of managed retreat legislation. And you can see those identified. So for setting clear roles, responsibilities and processes for managed retreat from areas of intolerable risk, to provide stronger tools for councils to modify or extinguish existing uses of land, to provide clarity on tools and processes for acquiring land and related compensation, to clarify local government liability for decision making on managed retreat and the role of the courts, and to provide clear criteria for when central government will intervene or not in a managed retreat process. So these are the objectives that have been identified within the managed retreat documentation as part of the consultation. It's, as I say, early thinking on that framework. In terms of the key feedback themes for our submission, these are outlined in the committee report, but just to touch on these, the key feedback themes include a focus on the interconnected system-wide approach that is outlined in the draft National Adaptation Plan. We support this approach, but we also note that legislative reforms to correct misalignment and clarify roles of local government in relation to third-party actors are required. We will be having a strong focus on the role of local government, and in particular a focus on Auckland Council in our submission, making it clear that the roles and responsibilities will need to be clearly defined through the resource management reforms and reflect local government resource capacity. Funding and insurance is a key theme, and we note that clarity is needed on funding mechanisms and alternative frameworks that will enable local government, private sector and communities to access funding. Managing risk and vulnerability is a clear focus, and we're outlining the need for clear direction with regard to who decides what level of risk is tolerable and who bears the liability for impacted properties. In terms of resilient infrastructure and systems, we are asking that clarity is needed around approaches and parameters for infrastructure design in the context of an uncertain climate future. And lastly, around managed retreat, we need to outline that resource management reforms will need to be carefully considered in terms of how managed retreat will be applied in practice. This includes roles and responsibilities and considering managed retreat alongside other options. So they are the key feedback themes that we have identified. There are a number clearly of other messages, and one of the key feedback points we've received on our draft submission is that we need to make our feedback points pop out of the submission. We need to make sure they are clear asks, clear recommendations to central government. So we will be working on that. There is also more specific information that we've worked with staff to identify in terms of the particular elements and the particular technical specifications or asks that might be required to support the draft National Adaptation Plan. It's also important for me to note that the consultation documents include a Māori worldview framework known as Ro Ora. This is complemented by a series of actions that specifically target Māori and others that will be significant to Māori. And this will certainly be an element of our submission as well in terms of how the National Adaptation Plan incorporates Te Ao Māori and how it enables Auckland Council to meet its obligations to Māori, recognising that Māori are often in a position where they will be impacted by climate change due to location and circumstances. I wanted to outline the submission timeline to you to ensure that that is clear. So the consultation was opened on the 27th of April. The memorandum was shared with the Mayor, Councillors, IMSB members, local board members, the Tamaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum and iwi leaders on the 10th of May. The governing body workshop was held on the 18th of May with the draft submission circulated on the 20th of May last Friday. Today, on the 26th of May, is the governing body meeting to seek delegated authority to approve the final submission. We will be accepting feedback from the Mayor, Councillors and IMSB members until the end of the day tomorrow and would welcome your feedback. We will then be finalising the submission for Tuesday, where it will be sent for sign-off by designated members, those who have delegated authority, with the submission due date being the end of next week, next Friday, the 3rd of June, which is when the consultation closes. That brings me to the end of my slides. Very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Matthew. If I can be slightly pedantic and point out that under point 4 of the key feedback themes, bears as spelt there means exposes rather than carries. So if you could change the spelling, it might be appropriate. I'd hate
Certainly.
the central government officials to pull us up on a point like that. I've just got one question, and you've received my feedback already. I am very keen that we don't ask for greater clarity about liability, but we express the point that we, as the collector of only 7% of public revenues in the local government sector, don't have a disproportionate liability on us. And I recall Jack Hodder telling the local government New Zealand rural and provincial sector meeting, actually, probably one that Deputy Mayor Cashmore was at, that the local government liability litigation risk is mainly on decisions to limit development at the moment, but in the future it will be on the consequences of allowing development and failing to implement adaptation measures. So I think we do have, just to misuse the word, real exposure there, and we really need to make it clear that funding liability, which the government in its consultation document says shouldn't fall on central government predominantly, nor should it fall disproportionately on local government. I think that's my main, that's more a comment actually rather than a question, but I don't have any questions at this stage. The paper is quite straightforward in terms of proposing the delegation, but just to emphasise to governing body members in the room and online, please have a quick look at that paper, and if there are any things that you want to influence the submission on, get your replies in by tomorrow. So that's really important. I think we haven't had a lot of feedback yet. Question from Councillor Richard Hills. Comment, is it? I'll just check if there's any questions first, Richard. No questions, so let's move to comments. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. And yeah, just a brief comment from me. Thank you to Matthew and the Tonkin and Taylor team and others for putting this together. It is in line with our Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, but it's a bit strengthened in the areas that the Mayor speaks about. It's very clear that we cannot end up in another leaky home building situation where we are sort of the ones left with the bill when our balance sheet just does not and will not into the future be able to deal with this massive issue from a local government point of view. Yes, we have responsibility in this area, but financially we need that clear guidance from government on what we can do here, and also the abilities through the RMA changes around what we can prevent. At the moment, there is not a lot we can do to prevent significant change in our coastal environments, even in intensification potentially under the government's changes to the NPSUD, through the NPSUD. So that is a real concern, that we will look like idiots if we continue to allow certain things being built in the coast when we know that, or we have good evidence that those structures or buildings will not be, not make it through the next decade, let alone 50 years from now. This largely, this obviously document is, the report is about delegating this, but I just want to say that it is, we should be congratulating the government for getting to this point and, putting this forward for significant change. We have not had a plan like this before. No one's really wanted to touch it. But the issue is we've had 50 years of warning so far on climate change, and globally and nationally we have not done enough, and we're still not doing enough. And the sad fact is that climate change is here. We see every month or so having 1 in 500 year floods. We have significant damage to our coastline, just our public assets alone when we have storms, and they're going to get stronger, and it's going to get more and more difficult to address. So this will give us far more direction on private land as well as the public land that we are doing through our shoreline adaptation plan. So it doesn't mean we need to stop the mitigation measures we're trying to put in climate action, but it does unfortunately point to the fact that for decades we've left the next generation worse off, and we need to deal with that situation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I have no other comments. Councillor Linda Cooper.
I'm hoping in the submission that we do point out to the government that some of their recent legislation is somewhat contradictory in terms of housing enabling bill, where it's an anywhere and everywhere type of approach. And we do have the qualifying matters of not building in flood zones, etc. But the fact that you have to make it a qualifying matter, that it's just not something that we just don't do, because we know that the costs going ahead for homeowners and hopefully not councils, because I absolutely support what you said, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Hills. We can't have another leaky building debacle and be the last person standing. So I just hope that we also ask them to make sure that they're not going to have contradictory pieces of legislation that put us in an untenable position where we're forced to do something by one piece of legislation, but forced to do something completely contrary with another piece of legislation, that they actually enable us to address adaptation rather than make it more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that point was pretty well expressed by a number of us who were at the workshop. So, Matthew, if we can build that in, that'd be great. Okay, there's no further comments, so I'll put the recommendations to councillors. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. And I'm now learning to wait long enough to hear all of the vote before I put the recommendation. Matthew, thank you very much for the work that you've put into that. Like so much of the work you have to do, it's been under a lot of pressure, so we appreciate the hours that you and the team have put into it. Right, we come now to item number 12, which is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report referred to us by the Audit and Risk Committee. I'm going to ask Councillor Daniel Newman to introduce the item, and Paul Robertson, our General Manager for Health, Safety and Wellbeing, to add any further comments. But before I do that, if I can ask you, Councillor Newman, to move, maybe Deputy Mayor Cashmore to second the motion, which is simply to note the report and forward it to the local board. And Daniel, I'll pass over to you to outline relevant parts of the report.
Thank you, Your Worship. I mean, this report is referred from the Audit and Risk Committee to the governing body for its consideration. It provides information in relation to progress for initiatives to understand the underway to improve the health, safety and well-being. And it's timely, I suppose, in particular because of the period for which the assessment was took place. This is in the midst of the council's response, given the impact of the Omicron outbreak, as well as other issues which were confronting for council, not least of which being the need to address the Omicron outbreak in the context of the COVID protection framework and the challenging discussions that were taking place within the Auckland Council family during that period. So I commend the report, and I invite officers to, well, it's up to you, Your Worship, but I note that officers are available to comment and respond to any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Paul, any further comments from you to the introduction by Councillor Newman?
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Kia ora koutou katoa. So this, as Councillor Newman has pointed out, a standard report from the Audit and Risk Committee. It does detail a range of projects and the progression of recommendations that we have been fulfilling. There are two new programs of work that are noted within this report, one being a review of our processes and systems for managing contractors and the overlapping duties that we have with those contractors, and a second piece of work to have a deeper understanding of our critical risks across council and to provide greater clarity and transparency of those risks. I'll take the report as read, though, and answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Paul. We've got the first question from Councillor John Watson.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. One, going to the No Excuse for Abuse campaign that commenced in mid-October last year by the looks of things. Point 12 makes a reference to responding to aggressive behaviours, violence at work and so forth, which is certainly marked during the period of the restrictions, and certainly a number of our council personnel who not that particularly used to that kind of level of abuse or hostility or anger are now returned to work. Those sorts of behaviours of perhaps receded somewhat, but people were pretty shaken up in some instances by what they'd experienced during that time. So in terms of that campaign and to understanding and building appropriate responses, which is mentioned at point 12, do any of the senior executive or the CEO for that matter, if we think of people like Greg Foran and Mark Powell with the warehouse group, do any of them go out and like spend a day or a proportion of a day working at any of these customer-facing centres that council operates to improve that understanding as some of these other large companies do with their senior executive personnel?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through the Chair, I don't have details on that as to whether or not other organisations do this, but I do know that our executive leaders within Council do site days and visits on a regular basis.
Okay.
I'll also note that, my apologies, I'll also note that the executive leadership team are looking at how we might be able to report on the number of those visits that are taking place to increase visibility of that.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some good examples in other big organisations where the people at the very top of the tree are actually out on the ground, and that has had a good effect on the workforce. So I'll be interested in a little bit more detail as to what that entails. My follow-up question to that is linked in some ways, and it goes to the Speak Up campaign that's itemised at point 14, and it refers to a governance group and project team there that has been created for oversight. How many of that governance group and project team are employees from the floor, from the ordinary workers, if I can use that term? How many people are taken from the bottom rung of the ladder, if I can put it there, the people out there and doing the job that are in this governance group?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair, I'm not aware of any frontline staff who are involved in the governance group for Speak Up. However, we do have a close relationship between the governance group and our staff Hawara Challenger group, which is made up of representatives of all of our staff networks and the representatives of staff for Hawara. So there is a close relationship there so that they will receive reports generated as part of that process. That's how we're keeping our frontline staff involved in the monitoring and review of what is being raised and how that's being managed.
Okay, so just as a quick follow-up to that, certainly when it comes to groups, particularly in sensitive areas like this where it relates to employee well-being, bullying and things like that, it is very advisable that in terms of any group that's calling the shops that kind of worker representation is there, or otherwise that the message or the experience, while it might be getting relayed through varied channels, is not there at the key decision makers if they indeed are making decisions that go to capture that experience. So again, I'd appreciate any more detail on the term on relation of the composition of that particular group and what it does with those various pieces of information that are channeled through it to it on behalf of the workforce as a whole. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Next question from Councillor Kathy Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Just a question, Paul. I'm delighted that we're moving into the second phase of No Excuse for Abuse. And I'd like to hear more, I'm sorry I'm not on the risk committee, about the appointment of a programme lead for violence and aggression and how that is being made available to elected members, people leaders and staff. So what's the process for that and how many hours is that person putting into that role?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Mayor, the appointment of a programme lead for violence and aggression was made after a conversation with the executive leadership team about particular risks in association with violence and aggression and the need for focused work effort to be placed into ensuring that we have a program of work that would address this at the root causes, as well as providing support to staff who who are exposed to this particular risk. The program leaders, as the title suggests, they're to ensure that the program is rolled out and so that we've got the work stream. There are a number of work streams associated with this. One of the things that program lead has been doing is working with staff and I believe some elected members on needs and programs of work that may support those groups. I don't have details about which councillors might be involved in that or which local board members might be involved in those conversations. I don't have that information to hand, sorry, Councillor.
No, it's okay. No, it's just great to see. So congratulations. Delighted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Paul and team. And first of all, just want to appreciate all Jim and also the exec team, but also your team for taking on all our concerns and advice and the meetings we've had with Jim, especially on the no excuse for abuse and the sort of well-being of staff, especially during COVID, but yeah, there was massive issue pre-COVID. So I'm really happy with the direction there. One thing I can't see that's there, and I just wonder if there's a body of work looking at overworking, and I'm not going to name any staff, obviously, that's their choice, but there seems to be a lot of staff working overtime at the moment, late nights, weekends, get emails at all sorts of times, and you're just aware that staff are working kind of ridiculous hours, and I have a real concern of the post-COVID burnout happening at Auckland Council. It is already manifesting, but is there any evidence or any program of work that is going on in that area?
Thank you, Councillor. And again, through the Chair, there is a program of work that is looking at psychosocial harm as part of that critical risk program that was referred to before. So looking at the risk causes, the consequences of those particular risks and what controls we can put in place to mitigate or manage those risks from occurring. Alongside that, we're developing a Hinengaro program, which is specifically related to mental health, and work design is one of the things that we are looking at specifically in relation to workloads and burnout risks to address the concerns that you've raised. And I share the concerns more broadly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very good answers. And that brings us to the end of questions. And I'll just pause to see if there are any comments. I don't think we've got any, so I'll just put the recommendation that we note this and refer it to local boards. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. Paul, thank you and all your team for your good work in this area. Much appreciated. Right, we come to item number 13, which is a summary of governing body information memoranda, workshops and briefings. Perhaps if I can ask Paul Young to move this. And second was Kathy Casey. So no questions or comments on this. I'll put the recommendation that we note the progress on the forward work program. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. There is no extraordinary business, so thank you very much, councillors, for those online and those participating in the room today. That brings to an end our meeting, and look forward to catching up with you probably next week, which is a pretty busy week for us on the budget front. Okay, have a safe weekend and take care. Mate wā, ka kite anō.
Thanks.